Hi everyone, welcome back to Rabbi's Reflection. I'm glad that you're joining with me today. We'll be continuing in our reading of Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Naomi Remen. Today, reading the story titled A Good Fortune. Stay with us as we read through the story and then offer some reflections. Whenever anything went wrong for the family, my father would shake his head and say, "The luck of the Remens." He applied the phrase liberally and even-handedly to such things as losing a parking space as well as the larger things in life, such as his bankruptcy and the chronic illness of his only daughter. The luck of the Remens was certainly not good luck. My father, who believed in nothing beyond a human agency in this world, felt life to be a random and dangerous enterprise, and he felt overwhelmed by it. The luck of the Remens was invoked often. For many years, I believed that we were unlucky people. In 1971, my father won a prize in the New York State Lottery. It was not a huge amount of money by lottery standards, but it was more money than my dad had ever seen in his life in one place. It was a windfall for him. It was a windfall for me, too, not because of the money, but because of what happened next. My father was in the hospital when he won the lottery, recovering from the removal of a tumor which turned out to be benign. He taped the winning ticket to his chest, saying that no one could be trusted to redeem it, not any of the family or any of his friends, not even my mother. He was convinced that someone would keep the ticket, or it would be stolen from them, or the people at the lottery office would not record it honestly once it was handed over. For a long time, he could not be persuaded to turn the ticket in. As the deadline to redeem it got closer, he swore my mother and me to secrecy, telling us that people would try to take advantage of us in some way if they knew. Eventually, he did redeem the ticket himself, but he never did spend the money because he was afraid that others would then know he had had it. Gradually, a very familiar anxiety settled around us, and then I got my windfall. I saw that the luck of the Remens was homemade. There was no way that my father could be lucky in this world. He could even turn winning $50,000 into a misfortune, a source of grief, anxiety, and stress. Until then, I had believed that we really were unlucky. Something gray that had hung over me all my life lifted. I have lived off my windfall from that lottery ticket ever since. I had other windfalls from my father's life, other lessons about gain and loss. Actually, there is no one alive who has not had the experience of loss. We start learning about loss from the moment we are born. Often we take our family's attitudes toward it as I did. These lessons about loss and the meaning of loss are some of the most important things we will ever learn. This wisdom is rarely shared because when we lose, we often feel ashamed. My father was the son of immigrants. He had worked since childhood and held 2 jobs most of his adult life. In the evenings, he would often fall asleep in his chair, his feet in a basin of warm water, too exhausted to talk. Always he had worked for other people, on their terms, for their goals. One of the earliest things I can remember is my father telling me how important it was to be your own boss, to be in control of your own life. I grew up on the 6th floor of an apartment building in Manhattan. All through my childhood, there was a game my father and I would play. He would talk about his house, the house he would someday own. There would be a dishwasher in the kitchen, and a garden. We argued about whether the living room should be painted light green or be cream-colored. I favored cream. Dad thought it was too upscale. I was almost 20 when he and Mom bought a little place on Long Island, and he retired. For a while, his dreams seemed complete. Some months after the place was his, I stopped by on a Sunday visit and found him asleep, exhausted in his chair. A familiar sight from my childhood, but I had thought that things would be different now. My mother told me he had just taken a little job so that they could keep the place up. Things are always deteriorating. On my next visit, he was asleep in his chair again. "Are you enjoying yourselves?" I asked. "Well," Mom said, "your father is afraid that someone will break in and take away everything we've worked for. He's still working because he wants to put in an alarm system." My heart sank. I asked how much it would cost. My mother evaded me and said they would have it in just a little while. Months later, my father continued to look weary. Concerned, I asked when they would be taking their vacation. My father shook his head. Not this year. We can't leave the house empty. I suggested a house sitter. My father was horrified. Oh no, he told me. You know how people are. Even your friends never take care of your things the way they would take care of their own. They never took another vacation. In the end, my parents rarely left the house together, not even to go to the movies. There could be a fire or some other sort of vague and unnamed disaster, and my father worked odd jobs until he died. The house turned out to have far greater control over him than any of his former employers ever had. If we fear loss enough, in the end, the things we possess will come to possess us. This week, we reflect on how we relate to life, specifically wondering how we relate to loss, to challenge, to blessings. How do we relate to the things in our life that we encounter on a day-to-day existence? And how does that move us or shake us? How does that inform the way that we approach our life? The stories that we tell ourselves inform the ways that we act and guide the decisions that we make at a conscious level and at an unconscious level. I think the story as presented by Dr. Remen is helpful because it shows us a distinction, or it shows us a helpful kind of truth about this. It's hard to necessarily see those stories of our own, but it can be easier to see it in others. And that is a big challenge when it comes to understanding the stories that we tell about ourselves in our own lives. We might not even be aware or know of the stories that we use and think about every day in the ways that we interact and think about and live our lives. But we often can see it in others. That person seems to always take things for granted, or that person, every challenge is always the biggest challenge in the world for them, or this person is always worried that someone's out to get them. Whatever that story might be, it's always sometimes easier that we can kind of pinpoint and realize it for someone else. So I think the tough story is, or the tough lesson here, the challenging lesson is not how can you see it in others, but how can you rewrite the script for yourself? What are the ways that the stories that you tell about yourself, that you are the biggest enemy of yourself? The way that Dr. Remen kind of points towards us in that is pointing to a sense that oftentimes when it comes to loss, there's a feeling of shame. And when there's a feeling of shame, we don't want to share. So perhaps a lesson that Dr. Remen is trying to teach us through this story is that if we feel less ashamed about loss, if we realize that everyone has it, and that there's actually great power in sharing our loss, then we can actually begin to find the ways that we're blocking ourselves, or the way that we respond to loss is actually setting us back. As she says at the end, if we end up making our losses something that we become fearful of, then those fears actually end up possessing us. But if we face those losses, we encounter them, we aren't afraid of them, and we talk about them, and we share them, and we kind of feel support about them, then they won't actually possess us, but they'll actually allow us to create an avenue, allow us to move forward, to inform us about how to live our best lives. So I hope you enjoyed, and hope it is providing you some reflection today, and I will see you soon.